Borderlands 4 has winning reviews, but it's getting roasted on Steam. Critics put it in the mid-80s. PC players are stuck with crashes and stutters. I'll show you the numbers that matter and why frame gen isn't a magic wand for everyone. Path of Exile 2's dropped my favorite patch yet, and there's a secret Ascendancy hiding in the Abyss. We'll talk about how that works and why trade finally feels good without turning the game into a marketplace simulator. Diablo 4 players, mark your calendar, the Season 10 dev stream hits Tuesday, and a big name just came back to the Diablo team. I'll explain why it could be a literal game changer. Silksong is doing incredibly well, but it has reignited the difficulty versus punishment debate. I want your take on that one. And Nintendo's new patent might mess with summoner builds in your favorite games. Hey folks, this is Rhykker, and I dig into ARPG and gaming news so that you can spend more time playing games. Chapters below to skip to different topics. We'll be kicking things off with a Borderlands performance reality check, then onto some Path of Exile announcement news, then onto the new Diablo hire, then we'll talk Silksong and its difficulty, we'll cover the latest in the ongoing video game censorship saga, and finish up with the latest Nintendo patent that was somehow approved. But before we go on, a word from this video's sponsor, Boot.dev. Boot.dev has gamified learning to code. They've literally built an online programming course into a fun programming RPG. You gain XP, you complete quests, you level up, you earn achievements, and you can rank on a global leaderboard, all while learning fully at your own pace. Boot.dev believes that the smartest way to learn to code is to ensure you're never bored. They offer a ton of courses, but their main package is learning Python and Go, back-end web development start to finish, and their courses are designed to get you to write a ton of code, since they believe that practice is the only way to really learn coding. I took a programming course back in college, and I remember having to learn the most boring stuff, and kept thinking about how can I apply this to something actually fun. I gave Boot.dev a try, and literally from lesson 1, we are doing fun stuff. They frame it like we're building a video game, not some dull accounting software. So here's my dashboard. I'm level 7, working on chapter 3 currently. Let's complete an assignment together. We need to get this code here to convert Fahrenheit into Celsius. So let's try result equals formula, and then return result. So let's hit submit, and hey, we got it. And if I ever found myself struggling, I could consult with Boots, an AI bear wizard that's been trained in every lesson and can walk you through any issues you have. So click the link in the description box and use my code Rhykker to get 25% off your entire first year on the annual plan of Boot.dev. Starting off with Borderlands 4 news. The game released this week to great critic reviews. On OpenCritic, we see an 85 out of 100 top average critic score, with 97% of critics recommending the game. On Steam, however, we're sitting at mixed. Only 63% of reviews are positive. But it seems a major culprit here is performance and crashing on PC, which is something even the critics brought up as the main criticism against the game. That said, as time goes on, more and more positive reviews are coming in to counteract the negative ones on Steam. Now, if you have a graphics card that can run frame gen, I believe that's going to be the 40X and 50X series, then you can see big performance improvements. But if you don't have one of those cards, or if you just don't want to use frame gen, well, now here's the thing. I think frame gen is great technology, but it's not something you want to rely on for good performance. It should be there to help squeeze out more performance for those who want to go for that, but it shouldn't be like the baseline requirement to perform well. And I think we're seeing more and more devs making their games on PC just looking at frame gen and being like, okay, forget it, that'll just solve everything. Now, despite all this, Steam alone peaked at 244,000 concurrent players, and that's before the weekend bump. Performance issues aside, the game seems great and lots of fun. A return to form for the franchise after Borderlands 3 went too overboard with the wacky tone. The story of Borderlands 4 is much more serious, leaving these side quests to be the comic relief. Borderlands 4 brings new movement options, more weapon variety, bigger skill trees. It's not groundbreaking. It's not going to win Game of the Year, but it seems like it's a solid, fun game that delivers what it promises. I've been playing it myself on PC. Only a couple of hours, but I haven't really been having performance issues. I haven't had any crashes. I'm just having fun, and maybe I'll make a full review video and maybe even some guide videos. I kind of want to go deep on this game. Now, one cardinal sin, however, I've heard, is that while PC users may experience poor performance, console players don't even get a field of view slider. You're stuck with the claustrophobic default. Literally the first thing I did when I booted up the game, before even loading in, just in the menu, I set the field of view to the max, because that's how I like my games. But I guess having that expanded field of view does mean the game is rendering more things on screen, leading to poorer performance. Maybe that's why they didn't make that an option on console. Oh, slight annoyance, but there's some UI UX improvements that can be made. Like when we unlock cosmetics, the unlock cosmetic doesn't get bumped to the top. You gotta have to like look through the list of cosmetics to see, okay, where is that latest cosmetic that I got? And I don't know if it just, I got bad vision, but like it's not super obvious to me which are locked and which are unlocked. A bigger annoyance though is how the backpack does not save your sorting preferences and always defaults to sorting the gear by manufacturer, which seems to be the least relevant way to sort your general gear. But nonetheless, I'm excited to continue my adventure in Borderlands 4. But how about you folks? What are your thoughts on Borderlands 4? Are you holding off for performance improvements? If you got the game, what are your thoughts? Are you liking it? Sound off. Because moving on to Path of Exile news, starting with PoE 1, we got word that 3.27, the expansion, will launch around the end of October. So it seems they have sorted getting back into their 4-month cycles for both PoE 1 and 2. Fingers crossed, no delays. Maybe now Last Epoch can finally plan to have a season that doesn't get bumped by Path of Exile. For PoE 2, patch 0.3 continues to be a big success. This is definitely my favorite playthrough. I think Act 4 has overtaken Act 1 as my favorite act. I love the new trade system. I am buying things, I am selling things, and I'm still playing the game because I'm getting hit with the gold tax. That was my problem in Diablo 3 back in the auction house days. Even just the gold auction house, real money aside. As I started to trade and see how easy it was to get items via trade, I started to feel like playing the game was a waste of time because I could be spending that time trading items instead, and give me 5 hours of play versus 5 hours of trade, I would get 20 times, 100 times more powerful through 5 hours of trade than 5 hours of play. But with the gold tax in trade in PoE 2, I can't do that. There is a limit to my trading. I mean, I imagine at high levels of trade in the end game, yeah, you're probably, if you become a competent trader, it's probably still going to be more efficient to trade than to play. But regardless, the game is at least encouraging me to go out and play the game. And yes, as someone who has played only solo self-out in PoE 2 up to this point, and now I started to use the new trade system, the game is much, 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 much easier when you can easily just spend a bit of currency and make all your resistances go from -5 to 75%. I could have blown literally all of my currency on crafting and ended up nowhere close to those results, but instead I spent about 10% of my currency and I was decked out in gear that ramped up my damage and ramped up my survivability. I still think Last Epoch has the best system for resolving trade versus non-trade play with its guild system, right? The Circle of Fortune for those who don't want to trade. But PoE wants to be a trade-based game, and I gotta respect that. And at least now I have a trade experience that isn't miserable. Now, I haven't experienced this myself because I'm not playing a witch, but apparently there's a secret hidden ascendancy that came with Abyss, the Abyssal Lich. So if you're playing a witch and you took the Lich ascendancy and you beat the Abyssal bosses at the end of Abyss encounters and you get Cool Mark's invitation, you bring that to the Well of Souls, and instead of throwing your weapon in there, you jump in there yourself and you transform into the Abyssal Lich Ascendancy. I think this is so cool. I love the idea. Ascendancy's hidden behind game mechanics. I want to see more of this stuff. Now, it's also worth mentioning that a lot of what's great about the feeling of 0.3 actually came via patches throughout 0.2 that a lot of people didn't stick around for. The game has been steadily improving since early access launch based on player feedback. The biggest criticism that I still see leveled at the game is about the endgame, which the devs acknowledged and said they were planning to address in 0.4, so we'll see what they come up with. Now, how do you folks feel about the Atlas and towers specifically? Do you think we just need some reworks there, or are more fundamental changes necessary, like scrapping the idea of towers altogether? Or having the Atlas not be eternally expanding, but more progression-driven with clear goalposts, kind of more like the PoE1 Atlas. I've also seen mention of the layouts of most Atlas maps having too many narrow corridors when most of the league mechanics are radial in nature, which play out a lot better and more fun in open areas. How do you folks feel about that? I also see people talking about how uniques are not good enough. Most of them have base stats that are just not high enough to justify using them over well-rolled rares. Even if they do something cool that you can work into your build, the opportunity cost is just too big. Do you folks wish uniques were stronger in PoE2? We certainly don't want to see things swing in the opposite direction and uniques become the end-all be-all that you slot into every item slot in the endgame. But when a unique is designed with a particular purpose in mind, then shouldn't it be a really good item for that purpose and not be beat by a rare that you can buy cheaply off the trade house? Then the last critique I hear brought up that I'll address in this video is about balance. Build variety feels like it's in a bad place because the power gulf between the meta builds and off-meta builds is so big. This is something I know we'll continue to see improve with every patch. The game is still in early access. We don't have all the classes yet. They're still working in new features. You know, balance isn't something they could solely focus on for now. I'm not worried. They're gonna figure it out eventually. Now, outside of all that, we got a patch this week that gave us a buff to sprint. There is now a short grace period at the start of a sprint where if you are hit, you will not be heavy stunned. So you won't get stunned out of an accidental sprint that you may have started while trying to just dodge away from enemies. They also nerfed the damage over time of ground effects from most Abyss monsters. Great change. Abyss felt way overtuned compared to the difficulty of everything else. And the ground effects were especially punitive against melee characters. Then in Diablo news, the Season 10 dev livestream is happening Tuesday, September 16th at 11 a.m. Pacific. And it sounds like the team is trying out a different format for this one. Adam Fletcher said on socials that they'll kick things off with a quick intro, followed by a video overview of everything coming in the season, and then they'll jump into a live Q&A. Seems they're aiming to make things clearer and more concise, and differentiated from their PTR Sanctuary sit-downs. There will actually be a cosmetic this time that you can get for watching any stream in the Diablo 4 category during their live stream presentation, so feel free to come by my Twitch stream to farm up the drop, or just stay tuned for my recap video that I'll post shortly thereafter. But the biggest Diablo news this week is that John Yang is coming home. As an associate game designer on Diablo 3 back in the day, John Yang handled class design for 3 classes, as well as systems and itemization design. He had first joined the Diablo team shortly before the release of Reaper of Souls, I think maybe a year before. And that was the expansion that really turned Diablo 3 around. And he was with the Diablo team through to the release of Kanai's Cube, leaving in December 2015 to then join the WoW team, where he worked on systems and items in Legion and did great work there. Since then, he worked on a big Hearthstone update, did great work there. Then he was a lead systems designer on an unannounced game at Blizzard for a year before he left to be a senior design lead at Bungie on Marathon for 3 years. Then he moved on to Apex Legends at Respawn Entertainment before finally coming back to Diablo now as a design director for systems. John Yang was always passionate about ARPGs. He even played a ton of Path of Exile. Whenever we'd see him talk in Diablo 3 interviews, he was always very clearly dialed in to the player experience. He knew what he was talking about. He had great contributions to D3, to World of Warcraft, and beyond. This is great news for Diablo 4. Although technically, I guess he didn't say he's joining the Diablo 4 team. He said he's joining the Diablo team. But I think it's fair to assume. I don't think he's going to Diablo Immortal. Then in some Silksong news, we're now a bit more than a week into the release of the game, which currently holds very positive reviews on Steam. A little Chinese translation snafu resulted in players from China being critical of the game at launch, but on OpenCritic it has a top critic average score of 91 out of 100, with 97% of critics recommending it, and it holds a player rating of a whopping 100. This is very close to the original Hollow Knight, which had a top critic average of 90, with 99% of critics recommending it, and a player rating of 100. Needless to say, Team Cherry knocked it out of the park again. Steam numbers alone peaked at 462,000 concurrent players. But one common complaint that's come up is the game's difficulty. And in response, Team Cherry released a patch that slightly nerfed difficulty in some places. Don't worry, they used a light hand, they didn't just make the game easy. Now, to my eye, the most valid complaints revolved around not quite the difficulty itself, but rather the runbacks. So you die to a boss, And instead of respawning like right outside the boss room and you can go in and have another go at it, you gotta like make a 2-minute trip to get back to the boss and try again. And that's something that a lot of players find tediously punishing and not fun. And that's a topic I'd like to raise with you folks. How do you feel about difficulty versus punishment? Because to me, these are two entirely different concepts. You can have a very difficult game that is not punishing, or a very easy game that is very punishing. In the past, difficulty and punishment tended to go hand in hand, especially when you factor in that games were made to gobble up our quarters at arcades, so anything to get us to become frustrated and mess up and have to try again. But over time, we've seen a progressive movement away from punishing mechanics. Lots of Souls-like games, for instance, let you now respawn, right outside the boss fight rather than have to do a lengthy run back. So Silksong seems a bit more antiquated in that regard. Do you folks believe punishment is a necessary part of difficulty? Do you think punishment ever adds to a game? And if so, how and why? Sound off in the comments. I've heard a lot of arguments against punishment. I've yet to hear a really solid argument in favor of it. Then moving on, we've had an update in the whole video game censorship story. If you'll remember, payment processors like Visa, MasterCard, and PayPal have allegedly been pressuring digital game distribution platforms like Steam into banning certain kinds of not safe for work games. They did this basically by threatening to withdraw their services as long as the infringing content was for sale. So, not being able to afford losing the main ways that people pay for games, Steam and company have complied. Now, the latest update is that any kind of mature-themed game, not just those that are specifically banned, just any mature-themed game now, cannot launch into early access on Steam at all. Game devs have been receiving the notice, quote, "Your app has failed our review because we're unable to support the early access model of development for a game with mature themes." And the reason for this seems to be that early access games are frequently updated with new content, and Steam cannot be manually reviewing every update of every early access game to see if any kind of infringing content has been added. So just a blanket ban on early access mature-themed games out of fear of repercussion of the payment processors. And need I remind everyone that Baldur's Gate 3 had sex scenes and it launched as a Steam early access title, something it presumably would no longer be able to do. This is why I keep urging people to not think specifically about what kind of games are being banned, but the bigger picture of where it's going to lead. What happens when payment processors put the screws on HBO, saying they don't want to allow customers to use their payment systems to subscribe to HBO as long as HBO has mature-rated TV shows? I've said it before, I'll say it again, this is not about the kind of content that was banned. No one was defending abusive adult games. The issue here is that corporations, profit-driven companies, unelected by the people and unrepresentative of the Vox Populi, are serving as the moral authority for millions and billions of people of different nations, cultures, religions, and values. And even if you happen to agree with the decision that these corporations are making now, they are not beholden to you. They are not beholden to any moral framework. A new CEO can take over at any time and decide to ban whatever he wants. Violent video games, games with religious themes, games with political messages, games that let you commit any crimes at all. They can do anything. In our society, when we give people the kind of power to make these huge decisions, in a democracy, we implement institutions and safeguards that allow us to ensure we can remove from power people that are making decisions we don't agree with. There are no such systems when corporations run the show. Now, we're just starting to deal with this in the West, but Japan has been dealing with this for a few years. Japanese politician and former assemblyman Zenko Kurishita says that a lack of awareness from the public is what allows payment processors to get away with this. A little background on Kurishita: in 2020, he lobbied against Japan's legal restrictions on children's daily gaming time, and just historically throughout his career, he's defended freedom of expression in media. In a recent interview with Den Faminiko Gamer, he warns that part of the danger of payment processors wielding these powers is that we don't know their true intentions other than protecting their brand, and they do not establish clear rules for platforms like Steam to follow. He said he heard from multiple people at multiple platforms that they just suddenly get a notice saying that starting next week, you won't be able to use our services anymore. And this communication doesn't even come directly from Visa or MasterCard. They often use third parties as intermediaries. There's no way to find out what specific content triggered the issue. So these platforms, like Steam, just err on the side of caution and often take drastic measures. And Kurishita believes that this is all a deliberate strategy from the payment processors to make everything so vague, so indirect, so that it's not obvious who is actually responsible or what the goal is, so that people, us, don't wake up and notice and start pressuring governments to regulate these guys, to break up the duopolies, to allow for greater diversification of payment processors. Moving on to other news, which is a little lighter, but still government related. Remember how Nintendo was trying to figure out how to sue Palworld, the Pokemon with Guns game that seems like a ripoff at first, until you realize that the gameplay is totally different from Pokemon games? Well, Nintendo's successful vector of attack against Palworld ended up being patenting game mechanics, forcing Palworld to change key systems in response, like replacing the gliding on a pal with gliding on a glider. Yeah. Well, the latest is that Nintendo has successfully been awarded some new patents in the US, one of which covers summoning creatures to attack enemies. At face value, this is a core Pokemon mechanic, sure, but you know what other games let you summon creatures to fight your enemies? Like so many games. Diablo, for instance? Necromancer, Druid, any kind of summoner build in any ARPG? This patent application was filed in 2023 and was just approved last week. Now, the fact that they have this patent doesn't automatically mean they're going to start suing everyone, but it means they can. Now, I'm oversimplifying what the patent entails. There are pages and pages of legalese showing flowcharts and diagrams of exactly the kind of summoning system patent. But to the best of my understanding as a non-legal expert, the criteria that this patent covers is a mechanic in which you have a character in a game, in a virtual space that you can control. It responds to your movement inputs. You can then somehow push a button to spawn some kind of other character, and while that other character is present that you have spawned, if there is then an enemy character present, then the character that you spawned will attack the enemy. And yeah, that seems pretty broad. That covers a lot of games. But I'm not a lawyer, so what the hell do I know? I'll tell you what I know. I know that video game IP lawyer Kirk Sigmund told PC Gamer that this is, quote, an embarrassing failure of the US patent system. Speaking about these recent Nintendo patents, he elaborated, quote, in my opinion, none of the 3 patents I've discussed here should have been allowed. It's shocking and offensive that they were. The US Patent and Trademark Office dropped the ball big time, and it's going to externalize a lot of uncertainty and potentially litigation cost onto developers and companies that do not deserve it. So, thanks Nintendo. And that's going to wrap up this week's video. But do be sure to check out last week's video in which we discussed the latest Diablo 4 dev video and what it teased. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more gaming content.